50,000 people used to live here. Now it's a ghost town.
Throughout human history, people have played games. As man's intellect and technology has evolved, so too have the games he plays. With advancements in technology, we are offered a new source of gaming entertainment known as video games. Over almost a 60-year period now, video games have developed immensely in nearly every single genre of video gaming imaginable. Let's start off with basketball. Finally, with basketball games today, the players have such fine details such as sweat drips that really do enhance the game's realistic feel. War games. In their earlier years, they were definitely the furthest thing away from being the most impressive game. However, as they began to develop, they began attracting more and more players, where the games focused mostly on tactical gameplay and tactical warfare. Fighting games. First-person shooters. And finally, driving games. Today, games have developed so immensely that not only has it become an entertainment source, but rather another method of communication in some cases. With online games such as role-playing games, a player's success is often determined by the amount of time that is put into the game rather than the individual's skill. So ultimately, the only way to get good at the game would be to devote a significant amount of time to it. Also, as games develop, becoming more realistic, players tend to feel more hooked to a game that involves fast-paced first-person shooting or an open-ended, fully customizable social online RPG game rather than a simple game of Tennis for Two or an 8-bit game of Super Mario. Video games today feel so realistic that we often tend to think how it is possible to come so far in just a small period of time from when the first ever video games were invented. Ah yes, Pong. First made in 1972, the game was pretty much the definition of simplicity. Developed from the sport ping pong, there's often been a misconception that this was the first ever game to drop.
Wrong, 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 wrong. Wrong, 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 wrong. You're wrong, you're wrong.
It was, however, the first video game to achieve mainstream success, and it sure did revolutionize video gaming, but it was not the first ever video game to be invented. The first ever video game is a complicated topic to touch upon. Really, it can only be answered if an exact definition of video game is given. Literalists consider it to mean a game generated via a computer using graphics displayed on a video device such as a TV or monitor. Others consider a video game to be any electronic game displayed using a video output device. Nevertheless, some of the earliest video games to be invented have been OXO, which was nothing more glorious than Noughts and Crosses. It was made in 1952, and it was the first ever video game to use a digital graphical display. You need to keep in mind that was something huge back then. It also used a rotary telephone control for game controls. Yeah, you heard me right, one of those rotary telephones you might find at your grandma's house. The actual computer was nearly room size, and ironically it played a game that could be played with no more than a pen and paper. Another more wide-known video game would be Tennis for Two, made in 1958 by William Higginbotham. Again, this was another ping pong game, just like Pong, yet surprisingly it was more realistic than Pong, even though it was made over 17 years ago. Players would have to get the moving light representing the ball over the wall using a computer analog stick and a display called an oscilloscope, which is basically a type of electronic test instrument that allows observation of constantly varying signal voltages. In this documentary, I will be going into depth on the dangers of compulsive/excessive video gaming and how it should be taken up as a real addiction, just like anything else. By no means am I trying to convey video games as being a negative thing, but rather to inform people how dangerous it can become, just like any other dependency. I myself love video games, and I've been enjoying playing them from as early as I can remember. The first ever games I played were the 8-bit games of Super Mario from a SNES console my parents had previously owned. Video games are a source of entertainment, and they are meant for pleasure and enjoyment. However, just like anything else, too much of something is never a good thing. Today, we see victims of video game addiction taking away time from their social life, ruining their way of thinking psychologically, and even physically ruining their health. Is it just today's video games that are so addictive? Did we ever hear of someone being addicted to Pac-Man? Video game addiction. Now that we know that video games are games generated via a computer using graphics displayed on a video output device, let's go on to actually defining addictive. According to one of the world's most trusted dictionaries, Oxford Dictionary, they define addictive as dependent of a substance or activity causing or likely to cause someone to become addicted to it. In a Web Medical Doctor feature on the definition of addiction, widely known psychiatrist Michael Brody set forth the following criteria. 1. The person needs more and more of a substance or behavior to keep him going. 2. If the person does not get more of the substance or behavior, he becomes irritable and miserable. Clinical Director and Doctor of Psychology of the Center of Online Addiction, Kimberly Young, says compulsive gaming meets these criteria, and she sees severe withdrawal symptoms in game addicts. She quotes, "They become angry, violent, or depressed if parents take away the computer. Their child sits in the corner and cries, refuses to eat, sleep, or do anything." Still not convinced that video games can be addicting? Fair enough. Let's compare symptoms of video game addiction to symptoms of perhaps the most addictive substances, drugs. If we look at the symptoms of substance addiction or drug addiction in comparison to video game addiction, it is no coincidence that there is a significant similarity between the two. We went and interviewed Alex, social worker for teens with drug addiction. Since he also plays video games on a regular basis, we asked him from his own experience in his fields of work whether symptoms of video game addiction are similar to those of substance addiction.
If I look at the similarities there, a person on drugs loses connection with a lot of friends around because he is stuck in what he does and tries to find people that do the same kind of activity. And you have the same problem with someone who plays too much computer games and gets stuck into that, is he's going to start losing a lot of his friends that aren't as stuck into computer games as he is, which is of course going to be a major problem for him in his social life. And also it is the same dependency when it comes to like the mental addiction that you get. The high in a computer game is to expand your guy or complete levels or whatever it is, and for most people this works without any major problem. But some people, they get stuck and see it as a way to flee from maybe real life issues that they can't control, maybe with a girlfriend, or they have a problem with a friend, and it's easier to just dive into a game, which is a bit similar to people taking a drug.
Clearly, excessive video gaming share the same symptoms as those of substance addiction. However, according to the American Psychological Association, it is still not recognized as a real addiction or disorder. This is mostly because, unlike with substance abuse, the biological aspects of video game addiction are still uncertain. However, Kimberly Young, Clinical Director and Doctor of Psychology of the Center of Online Addiction, says compulsive video gaming elevates dopamine, an organic chemical in the body, since gambling does the same and they fall in the same category. The psychological factors of video game addiction can be very destructive to an individual's mind. Keith Backer, director of Smith & Jones Addiction Consultants, mentions the person is trying to change the way they feel by taking something outside of themselves. The cocaine addict learns, I don't like the way I feel, I take a line of cocaine. For gamers, it's the fantasy world that makes them feel better. In most cases, one would tend to think, what is so dangerous about these games? So the player gets hooked, but where's the danger in that? Teenagers get hooked to books, reading all day every day. Someone spends a significant amount of time reading all day instead of going out, but why would that be harmful? He or she aren't hurting themselves. Parents often tend to think the wrong way. So my son or daughter is upstairs in their room reading or playing video games all day every day. At least they're not outside engaging with the wrong type of people, influenced to violence and drugs. Wrong. The consequences of teens who devote a significant amount of time to one specific thing often tend to stunt their social, emotional, and physical growth.
I think it's a fairly serious problem.
Counselor Barry Bailey at the Genesis Center in the US says getting hooked on video games is definitely a serious problem. He says some kids turn to video games because they seek control over a situation or to escape the pressures of real life. The problem with too much gaming is that it stunts their social, emotional, and even physical growth, something that could cause problems way beyond their teenage years.
Anytime you remove a young person from their developmental track and they're allowed to continue on a track that's contrary to healthy development, then that's going to create all kinds of problems that have to be fixed. They have to be addressed.
According to the American Addiction Association, children who play 4 to 5 hours per day have no time for socializing, doing homework, or playing sports. Backer, director of Smith & Jones Addiction Consultants, states it takes away from normal social development. You can get a 21-year-old with the emotional intelligence of a 12-year-old. He's never learned to talk to girls. He's never learned to play a sport. Childhood is the foundation of life. Therefore, without a solid base, one is unable to flourish and become what they are most capable of. Then again, it could go for anything that is abused, not just video gaming. Take the example of too much reading, as mentioned before. A teenager who spends their early years solely at home reading up in their room by themselves, lacks social, emotional, and even physical attributes other adults have picked up from their earlier years. The person may be so attached to these fantasy worlds the book takes them on that they use it as an escape from the real world, very similar to role-playing games within video games. Instead of just interpreting research and information from experts on what goes on in the mind of gamers and their feelings towards the games they play, I set out to get more immediate and first-hand information by actually asking the gamers themselves. 7 gamers in total were interviewed, where a set of questions were asked to them in the least biased way of video games being addictive. By no means are any of the gamers in the video about to be shown addicted to video games, but rather interested in them as opposed to being addictive. They simply enjoy playing video games just like the other 90% of teenagers who play video games in the US. We started off by asking them how many hours a week they play.
20 to 25 hours a week.
Roughly about 18 to 20.
Probably around like 10 hours, I don't know.
Around 28.
18 hours?
About 12 hours a week.
The gamers averaged out to have not so high gaming hours. However, when their gaming hours were compared to their exercising hours, it was generally obvious that they spent more time gaming than exercising. Most of the gamers also often exercised less than the recommended hours and gamed more than the recommended hours.
How many hours a week do you exercise?
I play tennis twice a week for 2 hours, and then I'm gonna start going to the gym for about like 3 times a week. But right now it's just 2 hours a week, plus I have an hour of PE in school, so that's 3 hours a week.
5 hours. None. Really, I walk to school every day, but other than that, I don't really have any activities.
Maybe 2 hours per week, 3 hours a week, not much at all.
I don't really exercise. I just have a PE class 2 hours every week.
When it came to taking breaks from long sessions of gaming, Susan Cohansel, with a physical therapy background, mentioned that it is essential for players to take breaks when taking long sessions to avoid aches or pains from sitting in one position for periods of over an hour.
I don't think you should sit more than 35-40 minutes at a time, as a longer period of time would be 35-40 minutes.
And what are the consequences of taking playing gaming for a long period of time without breaks?
Well, again, you're being immobile when your body wants to be mobile, so the muscles you have to move your skeleton aren't being used, and when you're just in these places, then you're being stagnating in certain positions, so you will put a strain in something extends like this and it flexes like this. So if you sit in a flex position for too long, you're technically stretching. For example, the back of your back, you would be stretching, overstretching certain muscles and weakening other muscles over long periods of time.
Some gamers mentioned that they could sit up to 2 hours without taking breaks or moving, showing that it had a negative effect on some of them.
Do you take breaks when taking long sessions? And if you do take long sessions, how long is it before you take a break?
I'd say 2.5 hours. And yeah, I do.
No, I don't. I just keep going. 2 hours, then I kind of get annoyed sometimes.
Well, not really. Like, I take breaks because I feel like now I should have a break. Maybe I play 2 hours, then I go have lunch, and I play another 2 hours, and so on. Usually I don't. Usually I just play all the way, and then, well, it depends. Sometimes if I lose a game, my frustration takes it out on how long I play. So if I lose a game, I usually take an hour break, watch TV, and then get back to the game and play. But if I'm winning, I just keep going until I lose. I usually get aches in my back if I sit in the same spot too long, but I usually sit with my legs spread out all the way down my bed, and I'm sitting up my back straight against a pillow and leaning my head against the pillow. And then usually after I play a couple hours, my back starts to hurt. But I don't switch positions, I just keep it that way.
Cohansel also mentioned that when players play for long periods of times without taking breaks, they become so hooked and get into the game that they become unaware of their surroundings or physical needs. When playing for long sessions, they could skip meals, showers, or maybe even classes. Mixing virtual or gaming life with real life has been said to indicate that gamers play too much since they are unable to separate the two worlds. We asked the gamers to see if they ever mixed gaming life with real life.
Yeah, usually when I'm playing soccer,
or like outside, I usually take in FIFA things to soccer. So like if you can score a nice goal in FIFA, I try to score it like I would in FIFA on my practices.
Sometimes, like I see a move on FIFA, I try and do it on the football field.
In China, the parents of a 13-year-old Tianjin boy are suing the makers of World of Warcraft because they claim that the game was responsible for the death of their son. Seemingly, the boy jumped to his death after reenacting a scene from the game, according to the Chinese news agency Xinhua. Even though the gamers that mentioned mixing gaming life with real life had very unharmful examples, their examples can still be compared to the 13-year-old boy in China who went as far as committing suicide. Yes, it sounds ridiculous, but hear me out. Obviously, imagine a trick in real life from a football game is much more different than jumping out of a 20-story building, imagining you can fly. However, depending on the games they play, it will naturally vary. Say it is a very aggressive wrestling game. It would seem reasonable for gamers to try out a trick from the wrestling game in real life, just as the gamers being interviewed would perform a football trick in real life. So there you have it, the dangers of video game addiction amongst teens in today's society. Clearly by now you should have no doubt on it being a serious problem. Just remember to keep in mind once again that video games are a source of entertainment and they are meant for pleasure. But just like anything else that is abused, it can become dangerous. Even though you might feel like you will never fall prey to video game addiction, it is still important to understand the dangers of video game addiction so the right choices can be made.